came while I was standing in the funeral home's parking lot, trying to remember if I'd locked the car. It was my aunt, my dad's older sister, and the first thing she said was, "The bank called me. Did you know there's a hold on the estate account?" I didn't know, so I hadn't put one there. My father had been dead for 11 days. I should back up, because the story doesn't start with that phone call. It starts the way most stories like this do, quietly, with small things I explained away for years. My dad was a methodical man, retired electrician, paid cash for everything he could, kept a yellow legal pad in the kitchen drawer with every bill, every due date, every account number written in his careful block letters. When he got sick, really sick, not just the manageable kind, he sat me down at the kitchen table and handed me that legal pad like it was something sacred, which for him it was. "You're the one I trust," he said. He didn't say it like a compliment. He said it like a fact. I was 29. I worked in healthcare administration, which meant I understood paperwork, insurance forms, coordination of benefits, the unglamorous machinery of getting people through hard things. My brother was 34 and lived 40 minutes away and had, in my father's words, a good head for enthusiasm, which was a kind way of saying he started things and didn't finish them. So I became the one. Power of attorney. Healthcare proxy. The person the hospital called when there were decisions to make at 2 a.m. I didn't resent it. I want to be clear about that. I loved my father, and I understood that some people love by showing up, and some people love by meaning to show up, and my brother was the second kind. What I didn't understand, what took me an embarrassingly long time to understand, was that my brother knew exactly what kind of person he was, and he had decided that was fine, and he had furthermore decided that my willingness to carry everything was an invitation to take more. The last 8 months of my dad's life were a particular kind of exhausting. I drove him to chemotherapy on Thursdays. I coordinated with his palliative care team. I renegotiated his supplemental insurance when his primary carrier tried to deny a claim, and I won, which cost me 3 weeks of lunch breaks and a lot of very careful emails. My brother visited on holidays, and one random Sunday in February when, I later found out, he'd had a fight with his wife and needed somewhere to go. He brought my dad a 6-pack of the beer my dad could no longer drink and watched football for 4 hours. My dad seemed glad to see him every time. I didn't begrudge my father that gladness. I understood it, but I noticed it. When my dad died a Tuesday morning in late March, with the windows cracked and the sound of the neighbour's lawnmower somewhere in the distance, which felt both wrong and exactly right, I was the one holding his hand. My brother arrived 40 minutes later. He cried in a way that made the hospice nurse put her arm around him. I stood by the window and looked at the yard. There was a lot to do after. There always is. My dad had a modest estate, the house, a retirement account, a small savings account he'd kept separate from everything else that he told me was for end-of-life expenses. His words. That account had about $22,000 in it when he got his terminal diagnosis. I had been named executor in his will. I knew what that meant. I filed the paperwork, opened the estate account at the same bank where my dad had banked for 30 years, transferred the funds, began cataloguing what needed to be paid. Funeral costs alone were over $9,000. There were outstanding medical bills. There was the mortgage on the house, which would need to continue until we could sell. My brother called me 4 days after the funeral to ask when he'd be getting his inheritance. I explained it didn't work that way. Estates take time. There's a process. He said, "Yeah, but like a ballpark." I said I didn't have a ballpark. I said I had a filing deadline and a tax ID number to apply for and a house full of 40 years of someone's life to go through. He said, okay, I was just asking. He didn't offer to help with any of it. The estate account, I need to explain this part carefully because it's the part that matters. My dad had set it up jointly with me, years before he died, for exactly this situation. It was practical. If something happened to him suddenly, I could access funds without waiting for probate. This was his idea. He was thorough like that. What I did not know, what my father also did not know, because he trusted his son the way fathers sometimes trust sons regardless of evidence, was that my brother still had his name on a very old joint account at the same bank, an account from when my brother was in his early 20s and my dad had co-signed something or other. That account had been empty for over a decade. My brother had never formally removed himself from it. And when the funds from my dad's savings were transferred into the estate account, something in the bank system, some bureaucratic accident of shared names and old account linkages, allowed my brother to see it. Not access it technically. See it. But my brother had also still had a debit card from that old account that had never been deactivated. I didn't know that either. The day my aunt called me about the hold, I had been at the funeral home finalizing the death certificate paperwork. I'd been there for 2 hours. I had my dad's yellow legal pad with me, the original one, because it had the account numbers I needed. I pulled up the estate account on my phone in the parking lot. The balance was $6,400 less than it had been that morning. I sat down on the curb. I don't mean that dramatically, I mean my legs just stopped holding me up, and I sat down on the concrete and stared at the number on my screen. $6,400 in 3 transactions, over the course of 4 hours while I was sitting inside a funeral home talking about death certificates. I called the bank. I was on hold for 22 minutes. When someone finally answered, they confirmed that the transactions had been made with a debit card linked to the old joint account. They could not tell me who had used it over the phone. I would need to come in. I drove to the bank. My hands were steady on the wheel. I don't know why I remember noticing that. I think it was because I was surprised by it. I felt like I should be shaking. I walked in and asked to speak with the branch manager. It took 45 minutes and a lot of careful documentation, but eventually the manager pulled up the full transaction history and showed me the records. Gas station in my brother's town. Grocery store 2 miles from his house. A cash withdrawal at an ATM that was, I would later verify, a 7-minute walk from where he lived. The branch manager looked at the screen and then looked at me and said, "I'm so sorry." I thanked him. I asked what my options were. I called my brother from the bank parking lot. I'd like to say I planned what I was going to say, that I had a strategy. I didn't. I just called. He picked up on the second ring. I said, "Tell me why you used a debit card on Dad's estate account today." There was a pause. Not a long one, maybe 3 seconds. But I've replayed that pause many times. It was not the pause of someone caught off guard. It was the pause of someone deciding which version of the story to use. He said, I didn't realize it was. I thought that was still our old account." $6,400, I said. 3 transactions in 4 hours. Another pause. "I was going to put it back," he said. "I just needed it for a couple weeks." I said, "That is not your money." He said, "It's Dad's money. We're both his kids." I said, "It's the estate's money. I'm the executor. You don't have access to it." His voice changed. Not loudly. My brother has never been the type to yell. He gets quiet instead and hard. He said, "You've been controlling everything for months. All his accounts, all his stuff, all his decisions. I'm his son too." I thought about the 8 months of Thursdays. I thought about the insurance forms. I thought about the Tuesday morning with the windows cracked. I said, "I'm going to need you to return that money." He said, "Or what?" And that was when I understood that he had thought this through, that this was not impulsive, that he had looked at the situation and made a calculation, that I would absorb this the way I'd absorbed everything else, that I would be reasonable, that I would protect the family from the ugliness of whatever came next. I said, "Or I'll report it." He said, "You wouldn't do that, not to your own brother." I want to tell you that I made the call immediately, that I walked back into the bank and filed the fraud report on the spot before I'd even processed what had happened. That would make a cleaner story. What actually happened was that I sat in my car for a long time. I called my aunt, who had originally called me about the hold. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "I've been wondering for years which one of you he'd try this with." I said, "You knew?" She said, "I knew who he was." She asked me if I had documentation. I did. I always did, because I was my father's daughter, and my father believed in documentation. I had records of every transaction, every transfer. every account balance since I'd taken over management of his finances. I had the legal pad. I had signed copies of the power of attorney, the estate documents, my appointment as executor. She said, "Then you know what to do." I filed the report. Not that day, 2 days later, after I'd spoken with an estate attorney and understood exactly what I was dealing with. My brother had accessed estate funds without authorization. The estate attorney was direct about it. This was not a grey area. This was theft. The fact that we shared a parent did not change the legal classification. The attorney helped me submit a formal complaint to the bank and a report to the county prosecutor's office. It took time. These things always do. The bank reversed 2 of the 3 transactions within 10 days because they had clear documentation that the account access was unauthorized. The third required a longer process because of the old account linkage, but it was eventually reversed as well. My brother called me 6 times in the first week after I filed the report. I didn't answer. He texted, "You're doing this to our whole family. Dad would be sick." I thought about my father's yellow legal pad. I thought about the Tuesday morning. I thought about what family had meant in practice for the last 8 months. I texted back once. I said Dad trusted me to do this right. I'm doing it right. He didn't respond to that. I won't pretend a legal process was satisfying in the way that you might want it to be. There was no dramatic courtroom moment. My brother ultimately repaid the full amount to the estate. The bank recovered most of it, and he paid the remainder when the prosecutor's office made clear that the alternative was a criminal charge. And then he hired his own attorney who wrote a letter suggesting the whole thing had been a misunderstanding about account access. It was not a misunderstanding. We both knew that. His attorney knew that. I think even his wife knew that, because she called me once from her own cell phone and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." I believed her. That was its own kind of sad. What did happen, what I hadn't anticipated, was the conversation with my dad's oldest friends at the estate sale we held in late May. I had put together the sale mostly on my own, priced everything, organised it, set up tables in the garage and the driveway, arranged for a local estate sale company to manage the day of logistics. My brother did not come. He sent a text the morning of that said, "Hope it goes well." An older man came early, before we'd officially opened. He'd known my dad for over 30 years. They'd worked together before my dad retired. He looked around the garage and then looked at me and said, "Your dad talked about you a lot. He said you were the one he'd trust with anything." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "I tried to be." He nodded. He bought my father's old drill set and a tackle box and paid in cash, and he shook my hand before he left. It sounds like a small thing, but I've thought about it more than I've thought about the bank statements or the legal filings or the text messages from my brother. The house sold in July. The estate closed in September. I wrote the distribution checks myself, one for my brother and one for me, equal shares as the will specified, and I mailed them certified mail because I was not going to hand him anything in person. He cashed his within 2 days. I deposited mine and then went home and sat at my own kitchen table and thought about my father sitting at his, writing everything down in his careful block letters so that someone he trusted would know what to do. I had done what he asked. I had done it the right way, even when the right way cost me something, even when it would have been easier to absorb the loss and keep the peace and let it go. I don't regret it. I want to say that clearly, for anyone listening who has ever been in a situation where keeping the peace would have meant accepting something wrong. I don't regret it. My dad used to say that the most expensive thing you can own is something somebody else thinks is also theirs. I used to think he was talking about property. He wasn't. He was talking about your sense of what you're owed. I know the difference now. And I know my own name on my own accounts. And I know what trust looks like when it's real. And I know the particular quiet of a Tuesday morning in March when someone you love is gone and the lawnmower is running next door and the world is just going on the way it does. I kept his legal pad. It's in my kitchen drawer now. I still think about that yellow legal pad sometimes. The way my dad's handwriting looked on it, all caps perfectly even, like he'd measured each letter before he wrote it. He wasn't a man who left things unclear. He wrote down what mattered in order so that someone he trusted would know exactly what to do. That someone was me. And for a long time, I wondered if being that person was a kind of loss, if being reliable had cost me something I couldn't name. The one who shows up pays a price. The one who doesn't will never fully understand. I paid it for 8 months of Thursdays, of insurance calls, of 2 a.m. decisions. And then, when it was almost over, I found out my brother had looked at everything I built and decided it was available to him. What I've come to understand is that nothing about what he did was accidental. People who take advantage of someone's integrity don't stumble into it. They locate it, they test its edges, and then they act when they believe the cost will be absorbed. My brother had watched me absorb things for years. He made a calculation. He was wrong, but only because I finally understood something my father had been trying to show me the whole time. My dad was not a complicated man, but he was a precise one. He knew the difference between love and obligation, between generosity and surrender. He documented everything not because he was suspicious of people, but because he believed that clarity was a form of respect for yourself and for whoever came after you. He gave me that legal pad because he trusted me to use it correctly. Using it correctly meant not letting someone rewrite what it said just because they shared my last name. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't come from being smart. It comes from paying attention to patterns, to what people do when they think you're not watching, to the gap between what someone says and what they actually do. I had watched my brother for years. I had the information. What I lacked for a long time was the willingness to act on it. I kept translating what I saw into something more charitable than the evidence warranted. That's not kindness. That's a failure of honest thinking, and it's one I won't repeat. Filing that report was not easy. I want to be honest about that. There was a version of me that wanted to let it go, absorb the $6,400 the way I'd absorbed everything else, keep the surface of things smooth. That version of me would have been a coward. I don't mean that harshly. I mean it accurately. There are moments when the only decent thing to do is the hard thing, and choosing comfort over integrity in that moment would have meant something about who I was. I didn't want it to mean that. My dad used to say that your word is the one thing nobody can take from you. Only you can give it away. I think about that every time. I wonder if I did the right thing. I kept my word to him. I protected what he built. I did it the right way, and I stood behind it when it cost me something. That's what he left me, not just the legal pad, the understanding that doing right and doing easy are almost never the same thing, and that the difference between them is exactly where your character lives.